Hello and welcome to All Hands on Tech, where today's leaders talk tomorrow's technology. I'm Daniel Blazer. Today's episode is an uplifting conversation with Gary Bolles. Gary is a lecturer, writer, and consultant on the future of work and learning. He has also authored several Pluralsight courses. Our conversation covers several timely topics, including unbundled work, distributed teams, the importance of empathy, and different ways we can frame this COVID-19 moment. His experience is one that I think all of us can learn a lot from. How are you doing today, Gary? Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, listen, thanks for the invitation. It's really great to have the conversation.
Before we get started on some questions that I have for you, do you want to just provide a quick overview of your background and kind of what brings you here on the podcast today?
So because our time is short, I'm not going to even give you the Cliff's Note version. I'll just hit a couple of bullet points. So any attempt to give the impression that I have a linear career path would be completely inauthentic. So I've done everything from being trained as a career counselor when I was 19. I was never very interested in college, sort of fell into the family business, which just happened to be my father was a writer of job hunting books. And of course, the takeaway should be, you do what you love. So I found high tech and first came to Silicon Valley and this will really date me, 1983. And so after growing up in San Francisco. And so since then, I've done a variety of things. I'm a recovering journalist. I co-founded half a dozen technology magazines in the 90s. I'm a serial and sometimes parallel entrepreneur. I've started a number of different conferences and initiatives focused on impact, and now pretty frequent lecturer around issues related to the future of work, the future of learning, and the future of the organization.
So, like you mentioned, you're kind of an expert on the future of work and learning. Did you ever expect that a disruption like we're currently experiencing could happen?
So, my friends Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis, the founders of Singularity University, are futurists. If I'm anything, I'm a near futurist. I don't think of myself as trying to make prognostications for the future. Instead, what I try to do is sort of see the dynamics of markets, because typically these things are sort of market-driven, big changes, big shifts, and then plot out those lines and just say to people, hey, choose your scenario. But I did wake up one morning in August 2019, and I posted in my feed on LinkedIn, where I tend to try to walk through a variety of thoughts, but I said, the real test for the future of work is going to be in the next recession, the next downturn, because the previous recessions were, I think, sort of training wheels for how we were going to reshape work and begin reshaping our organizations. And then along came a virus. So I believe that the dynamics, the table was set, and then this virus came and just tilted the table and wiped everything, wiped a lot of things off. Not everything, changed a number of things. So I think some of these bright lines were understandable to lead to what we've got.
Kind of shifting over to the future of work, what do you see as the tenets of the future of work, and how can they contribute to a better future for all of us, for all of humanity?
So these big, what we call wicked problems, messy, complicated, huge, multi-billion or trillion-dollar markets, and they get pretty overwhelming because there's so many issues, and so I try to distill down into 4 domains, and I mentioned this on a couple of my Pluralsight courses, but the basic idea is that you can sort of figure out your anchor is in one of 4 domains. It's you're either focused on yourself or others as individuals, organizations, communities, or countries, right? So you care, at the micro level about each of us individually, or about yourself and what you're trying to do, or about specific populations. And when it comes to the future of work, what do each of us want? We want to be able to find or create meaningful, well-paid work. And there's lots of other things we want in life, but that's kind of it. So that's at the individual level. For organizations, well, that's kind of the way we've all sort of agreed we're going to channel human energy. So for organizations, they typically want to know, how am I going to find the talented people that I need today and tomorrow? Communities want to be ecosystems in which everybody can thrive. And then finally, countries, if you're really dealing with macro levels, when I sit down with the heads of labor or education from countries like Chile and Brazil and Canada, a lot of the issues are how you build an inclusive economy. Now, that might sound too far away from the reality of any one of us, but the truth is we actually all can help to build a future in any one of those domains. We just sort of need to have some biases to, how can we each contribute at the level or in the context that we feel can build that positive future.
Speaking in terms of unbundled work and distributed teams, how do you think that these kinds of things will change the communities that we live in?
So I'm glad you mentioned unbundled because that's a metaphor that I use a lot. It was actually created by my friend John Hagel, who is now with Deloitte's Center for the Edge. And the basic premise is that so many of the things that we do in our lives, the constructs, the institutions, sort of bundles of things, whether it's the ways that companies provide their products or services to constructs like a job. And so I wrote a piece back in 2013, I think, on unbundling work. And my basic premise was that we've got these constructs, these things, jobs where we have a whole bunch of characteristics that we sort of bundled together. And then we've had, you've got compensation, you've got the people you work with, you've got working conditions, and so on. And what happens when technology over and over again impacts an arena is it pulls the pieces apart. And so we used to all have to work together in the same place. And now we're not. Like literally, we're not. Not everybody can do that. There's a whole bunch of jobs don't have that luxury. But if you can, especially if you're digitally enabled in your work, then you are working separately. And so you're not in the same workplace or in the same geography. And so how does that impact work? Well, in some cases, that creates tremendous opportunity, variety. People get to do lots of different projects. And in other cases, it creates a lot of uncertainty and precarity and fragmented. And so as we've shifted to distributed teams, and I'm glad you used that word as well, because a lot of people like to say remote, but it's really distributed work as we're coordinating with others. We know that there's lots of benefits to it. We're not in meetings every single moment of the day, or at least not in-person meetings, and we're in our homes, which has its pluses and minuses. But we actually are recognizing that we each have lives, we each have families, we each have obligations in those lives. And now I think what we're doing is we're learning how to be a little more accommodating to that. But the challenge and opportunity with communities is to be thinking about, well, as work does become more unbundled, how do you become the kind of environment where workers can work more from remote? They can be part of distributed teams. You don't want a community that's entirely made up of all remote workers, that don't have any interacting with each other. Obviously, you want it to be a portfolio of different kinds of work contexts. But ideally, what you want is to be able to have communities that can thrive where there is work that is distributed as well as work that's in person. And that all is a heterogeneous group of activities. It's not just, for instance, in Detroit, where we did a conference on the future of work, everybody focused on automotive. It's not just Pittsburgh, where we did actually a podcast yesterday talking about its ecosystem that used to be focused on steel. You need heterogeneous ecosystems. And I think that's one of the things we're going to get out of this era of unbundled work.
Yeah, it's really interesting as, so many of us are kind of experimenting with working from home for the first time. I mean, it's kind of unprecedented because a lot of stores and whatnot are closed. But I think that naturally a lot of us were working from home now, and we're looking a little bit more to our community right around us. And we're thinking, if I'm now going to work from home every day a week, 5 days a week, or 1 or 2 days a week, like what are the types of things I want in my community, and how am I going to interact with that community differently? It really does change your point of view, I guess.
Absolutely. No, I think that's an excellent point. The truth is, I don't want to oversimplify, but you can kind of think of there's sort of two contexts, for community. There, and actually, I want to make sure we're being clear. We tend to overuse the word community on and online, and there's a half a dozen different types of communities. What we're talking about is communities of geography, right? And so communities of place. And so they kind of think there's sort of two groupings. There's the more traditional small town. We kind of know everybody. Everybody's in everybody else's business, but something bad happens to somebody and then the town comes together and helps. I mean, at least that's, traditionally the model. It's not perfect, but it's, you see the people that you are continually interacting with and doing business with. And so that creates a shared sense of, togetherness, or at least proximity. Cities are very different. Cities, we have to actually build communities of intention because, sure, we have a geography, we're in a neighborhood, but we might not even know the neighbors literally on either side of us. Because the scale of the city allows us to basically build this abstraction layer between us and other people. And so you're right. What you want is to be able to have the kinds of incentives where you actually now suddenly the blinders come off and you look around and say, well, I better know my neighbors because I'm sheltering in place, and if I need, toilet paper and I can't get it, well, maybe or they can't get it, then maybe we better be helping each other. And I hope that is one of the things that comes out of this process, is that we actually are better connected to our communities of geography.
Right now, there are unfortunately a lot of people who find themselves unemployed or underemployed. Let's say that you're one of these people. How can you decide which skills that you should develop and what would be the most relevant in a competitive market? That's question kind of one. The second point of that is, how do you then stay committed to the self-development that is important?
So you've asked two of the most fundamental questions about humans and work choice, career choice, and so these are the ones that we're continually trying to solve for. The good news is that there's plenty of help and techniques that we know are effective. It's just a matter of knowing how you, as a human being, like the way that you most effectively can navigate these kinds of transitions. And this is a unique transition. In literally a month, we suddenly had 20 million new people on the unemployment rolls, and there's a lot more that are looking for work beyond that. There's a lot of gig workers weren't even classified that way. So we have basically the level of unemployment that we had during the Great Depression. We're really close to that. In less than a month and a half. And so how do we factor for that? Well, first, we know no matter whether it's a good work market or a bad work market, it always starts with sort of three elements. It's what we call the what, the where, and the how. The what is what's unique about you, like what are your skills and knowledges and so on. And it's very important to differentiate between the transferable skills, the skills you can use in many situations, which we unfortunately call soft skills, and the skills the knowledges that you have, which we unfortunately call hard skills. And so thinking about which ones to develop, what we say first is first inventory, in the same way as if you were going on a trip. First know what you have. And then know what you love about what you have, the skills you most love using, the problems you most love solving, the bodies of knowledge you're most fascinated by, whether you're expert in them or not. So that's the first deliverable, because you've got to understand yourself better. And then the where is what are the different scenarios for those unique characteristics. And that you might need to be a little more flexible, especially if now you're in, a period of biblical unemployment. And so it's competitive. There aren't many opportunities. Well, then this is where you have to be flexible. You got to be thinking about what the balance between what I need to get today, like the work I must have to be able to feed my family and put a roof over their heads, and then the longer term thing I want to do. And so you're going to have to adjust that a little bit. And that feeds into the how, the mechanics, like how you find that job or create that work. And in periods like this, you're going to have to get more creative. Creative job search always are the most effective techniques anyway. But unless you have a highly in-demand skill set and just posting yourself or answering online want ads or posting yourself on an online work market, normally you're not going to find all that much work. So you got to get very creative about that process. So, but you must be driven by what you're curious about and by what you feel is the kind of work that you feel you can do best. And the more you've done that self-inventory, the more you can envision different scenarios, the more then you're going to be able to tell a potential hirer why you're the one to solve their particular problems. Now, as to staying true to that commitment, that's the part that I was talking about is, well, how have you gone through these kinds of things in the past? We know that there are these annoying people who pick a goal and just go and achieve it and make all the rest of us look bad. But the majority of us, we don't kind of work that way. We think of something and we want to do it, but then we procrastinate and we delay, or we look for the wrong thing, or or we just don't always keep true to the task. And so figure out what you have done in the past to be able to achieve that. And often what we need to do, what I call externalize. That is, you have goals, you got to tell somebody. Now, telling your spouse and asking them to sort of be a taskmaster for you, probably not a good idea. But finding people that, maybe it's a coach, maybe it's other job hunters who are also looking, and you've together committed to be a job club. And you're going to each say, okay, here's the number of calls I'm going to make this week. Here's the number of companies I'm going to interview. Here's the number of contacts I'm going to ping on LinkedIn. Whatever it is, you're going to make those commitments to somebody outside yourself. And then figure out what it is that helps you each time. When you hit those numbers, give yourself a little reward. If you don't hit the numbers, have somebody to strategize with as to why you didn't that time. And then, next time try to do better. And these are stressful times. This perfectly understandable that we get anxious, and these, can be overwhelming, and we can think of all the other people that are looking. In any job market, those characteristics always exist. So figure out how you can get the support that you need to be able to stay true to the task.
I like that a lot. And I think it's important to kind of emphasize, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is like, if you're going to find some people to kind of hold each other accountable, they need to be like actual connections that you have, versus if I just post on LinkedIn that I'm going to do this today, I'm going to apply for 15 new roles today, and I just kind of throw it out into the ether. To me, that's not as helpful as having 2 or 3 direct connections that I am exchanging direct messages with. Am I fair to kind of go that route?
Yeah, I mean, everybody has their own path. I mean, we do know people that basically live their lives on social media. You know every single meal that they're having, posting on Facebook or on Instagram, or all the people they're excited or humbled to have met, on LinkedIn. We all have our own path. I would say the most effective processes that we know of from 50 years of this book called What Color Is Your Parachute, that my father first wrote in the early 70s. The basic premise is that as you're going through these transitions, these pivots in your life, it's a different set of problems to solve. And it's a couple different problems. It's just, how do you get up in the morning, and how do you stay true to the task, and then you've got to talk to people, and that can be very stressful. And so there's a bunch of barriers to get through, and just putting it out to the universe might be fine, especially if you're just trying to find a particular kind of contact or kind of organization. But you're right. What you really want is, and I'm not trying to sell the services of coaches, although I know many wonderful coaches, and it's tremendously helpful if you can find the right resource to be able to help you through this kind of process. But for other people, it's a buddy. It might be a former mentor, but somebody that is engaged with you, because what you want is somebody that's going to gently hold your feet to the fire. It can't be where it's somebody who said, oh, I know you said you were going to call 20 people last week and you only called 2. Well, and the week before you only called 2 as well. No, it has to be somebody who's going to say, well, what is stopping you? Fix that. Let's help you get over that barrier, right? Let's understand what is the thing in front of you that keeps you from achieving those goals, because otherwise, we're all human. And one of the aspects of being human is we're really smart. We can make up excuses for anything. And we'll keep on doing that in many cases if the only taskmaster is ourselves.
How should we think about the levels of vulnerability that people are experiencing right now? And what do you think our goals should be to be able to create kind of a more stable future?
So this is where we're thinking sort of more at the country level, right? Like the big macro sets of issues. And what I'm fond of saying is we always value what we value. That is, we put money and resources behind the things that we think resonate with our personal beliefs. And so different countries have different design heuristics. That is, they've committed to certain things at the intersection of their economies and their societies. And so, for instance, in the Nordic countries, in Germany, when they hit downturns like this, basically they've already thought about them. And they have rules and laws and practices that encourage companies to keep people employed. Russia doesn't have a history of this, but Mr. Putin announced, okay, all you employers, for 1 month, your employees are going to stay home and you're going to keep paying them. That's it. Just do it. So now we haven't approached it that way in the U.S., and it's for a variety of different historic and belief system reasons. But the problem is that, we have to decide between ourselves what we value. Like, do we value the elderly? Well, we've proven we actually value the elderly because we're shutting down. We've locked down the system, and we wouldn't be doing that if we thought, a certain percentage of them are going to go. That's fine, right? So we've proven we value the elderly. We don't value them the way a lot of other cultures do. For instance, in Japan, we don't value them for their wisdom as much. We don't value them for the ways they can continue to contribute to society. But there's all sorts of populations that in the previous recessions were already disadvantaged, and the nature of those recessions disadvantaged them even more. The basic premise is there are people that are born. I always say there's two kinds of problems. The problems we choose, the problems you want to focus on in your work, and then there's problems that choose you. You didn't choose to be handicapped. You didn't choose to be born in a ghetto. You didn't choose to be born to poor parents. You didn't choose to have a learning challenge. You didn't choose any of those things. And yet here you have to overcome those before you can even go overcome the problems that most people would deal with in work. And so if we don't focus on the inclusion of those who have some of these greatest challenges, of those who are not typically included, what's happened in each of the previous recessions that we've gone through is we've made them even less included. And so it isn't putting everything on a silver platter for any population. It's increasing their access and their opportunity to be able to build a meaningful work for themselves and to be able to feed their families and put a roof over their heads. That's the challenge that we have now. And actually, we can solve that. We can solve that pretty quickly. The next, we just did a big tranche of capital to, a couple $1 trillion to try to help people and businesses. The next tranche should be focused specifically on keeping people on payrolls. Like, that's it. Everything you do to keep people having a job, all the statistics, it's really clear, do that first. Second, that you got to focus, you got to spend a ton of money on training, like tons of money. Training within companies, independent learning. We've got to become lifelong learners because that's the only way we're going to deal with this, constant disparity and with a constantly changing landscape of work. Exponential change is only going to accelerate. And so this is our opportunity, is to create that more inclusive fabric to be able to help us to become more resilient for the future.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot there, but I think it is really important for people to hear that. I think especially considering, like you were saying, kind of the layers of challenges, right? A lot of us are united right now in this challenge of this COVID-19 scenario, unemployment. But like you said, there are other people that this is just kind of one more layer. And they're already dealing with some other things that a lot of us can't even really imagine. And now it's just one more thing to deal with. So I think that's definitely a great reminder. Next question for you. How can we use this experience? And I guess this is kind of related. How can we use this experience right now to gain empathy that will hopefully increase our support of our local and global communities?
So I'm going to give you sort of two different contexts for this. One that is if it's part of your belief system, and another if it's not. So if it's part of your belief system, then that you believe that there are people that do have problems that chose them, and that it is our role as humans to help those. We helped John Legend with a speech that he gave, a commencement speech that he gave a couple of years ago at his alma mater, UPenn, and he talked about there's 3 levels of love. There's love for yourself because you can't love others. There's love for your friends and your family, the people that are close to you in the next circle. And then the outer circle is to love people that you will never meet. And so this is a tremendous opportunity, is to think about, if it's part of your belief system, well, how will you help people that you will never meet? And each of us can fall in love with a particular kind of problem. It might be a problem directly in front of us in our community: homelessness, precarity of work, hunger. But it might be problems that are of people halfway around the world. But you, with your tech talents, you bring a unique set of skills to be able to help solve these problems. If you imagine going back several hundred years and somebody wanted to become a farmer, but they didn't have a plow, they might have a whole bunch of knowledge about doing a farm. But if they do everything, including tilling the fields by hand, they're just never really going to be able to get there. They needed to have, somebody's got to have a plow. Well, technologists today have the modern day equivalent of the plow. There's lots of people that want to solve problems all around the world, but they're not technologists, and they don't know how to build software or hardware in concert with software to solve that problem. And so, so many of your listeners, with their technological skills, they actually have the needed skill set. There is a gap, and they can help fill it. So that's if it's part of your belief system. If it's not part of your belief system, then what I would argue is there is something in your community, some issue, some group of people, even if it's just in your family, and they have some issue that they're dealing with that you can fall in love with, that you can actually help find. If you can help design to solve for that problem, and I can give you tons of examples of amazing innovators that have done that, then now externalize that and scale it. Figure out how people with that same problem you could be solving for others, right? So either it's part of your belief system and you just are going to do it because it's the right thing to do, or you don't necessarily believe you want to go help people you've never met, but you've got some near-term problem of somebody you care about that has it, and you could scale that solution.
Related to this, I know that you have some guiding principles for applying technology-based solutions. And maybe can you speak to those? What are those guiding principles, and how do they help design for equality and resilience?
So I'm just going to give you a couple of sort of touchstones. And again, your listeners are technologists, and a lot of them have been involved in design thinking processes, in agile processes, and so on. So I'm not going to sort of recreate a lot of that tool set and skill set. I think I tend to focus more on mindset, right? So if you think of mindset and skill set as working together, I'm working under the assumption that a lot of your listeners are constantly developing their skill sets. What's can be a little bit more to learn is around the mindset. And so what happens often when we're trying to go, hopefully fall in love with a problem that somebody else has, the need, I think, is to be able to think about what will get the best possible outcome that actually meets the real need, not what we think the need to be. So I'll just tell you, if you don't already know, a lot of the sort of design thinking and especially rapid prototyping processes, please go and learn. IDEO is the gold standard of design thinking, and there's a guy by the name of Tom Chi is the gold standard on prototyping. But please go look on YouTube, look up a bunch of those videos, watch any of the courses on Pluralsight that help you to sort of fill in those gaps. But let me tell you where people tend to sort of go off the rails or sort of miss the boat, to mix our metaphors. So at first, what we find is that most people don't really understand the problem that they're trying to solve. We as humans, we do this sort of mental shorthand. Society's big and complicated. People are complicated. But we see a problem in front of us like homelessness. And we tend to have this mental shorthand that actually blinds us to what the real problem is. And so it turns out homelessness is, unfortunately, it's one of the worst labels we could be using, because it's actually about 24 different situations in people's lives, each of which look like someone is no longer sheltered or at the very least is on a street corner. And then we make some assumptions about them. And so it's critical at the front end to make sure you understand the problem. So that means a lot more work to be able to gather the information that helps you to really, really hone down to what the problem set is. Secondly, as we think of alternative solutions, we go through a process where we're trying to do, designs, rapid iteration, and so on. And often what we do is we use proxies. So we go and we find somebody. I always use the example of the Lorax. You find somebody who speaks for the trees. Well, why not go find trees? Why go find somebody who's going to tell you how millennials think or the challenges of homelessness? Why don't you go find several people that actually have those challenges? Because otherwise you're guessing. I'm going to give you a perfect example. There's an amazing woman, Virginia Hamilton, used to be one of the regional directors for the Department of Labor. And she tells a story about a workshop that she was doing for kids who are homeless. And in the libraries, the librarians were wondering, why do these kids walk in the door, look around, and walk out? They just never stick around. And so they want to do a design workshop. So Virginia and some other professionals bring together a bunch of librarians. And then one of the librarians says, wait a minute, we should ask Joe, who's the security guard at one of the libraries. He should come too, right? Because, he sees these kids all the time. And the librarians are constantly just saying, why do these kids leave? We don't know. Maybe it's they don't like us. Or and Joe said, I know. He said, they're homeless. They've got everything they own with them, like in a backpack. And they walk in, where can they're going to put their backpack down. They're going to go looking for a book and somebody's going to steal it. So they leave. So the libraries now, and this is in Detroit, they are redesigning, taking a room, and they're building lock boxes with codes that anybody can use. And so the kids can come and they can spend the entire day there. So that's a perfect example of you've got to understand the problem. And luckily, Joe could speak for the trees, who often can't speak for themselves in circumstances like that. But now you understand the problem. And then the final step I would say is rapid prototyping helps us to be able to understand the kinds of solutions that we can bring to bear on different problems. It's critical to have the mentality that, once again, the trees are involved. They're going to tell you what they like and what they don't like. And the example that I use is Ultranauts. So this is an amazing company. They do QA testing for websites. And 75% of their distributed workers, they're in 17 different states, are on the spectrum. And so these typically guys, and they wake up in the morning, there's a piece of software to walk them through everything they're doing. And they can be 50% faster than some of their biggest competitors like IBM, and with extremely high quality, because it just so happens that they're very, very good about focusing and staying on task. But they're surveyed at the end of the day. What did you like? What did you not like? And half of them always answer. And a lot of times what's happening is the software is being continually iterated. And they will say very specifically, don't do that. Like, stop that. That thing you just changed, I want it back the other way. And so as you're prototyping, as you're constantly iterating, you need to get that constant feedback from the trees so that you're ensuring that you're meeting their needs.
Wow, those are some great examples. And I know that I'm going to be thinking of that now going forward, is finding someone that can speak for the trees rather than, like you said, making assumptions that are usually wrong, right? Because we don't have those same experiences. You have some tenets of the future of work you mentioned earlier, and they kind of indicate that we're moving toward this more human-centric future. What opportunities do you see for the tech community to design more effectively around needs, outcomes, and relevance?
No, great question. So first off, I would say the one thing I'd modify is I don't think we're moving towards a more human-centric future. I want us to.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
I think right now I call this period that we're in, here in the first half of 2020, the Great Reset. This isn't a pause. We hit a big reset button. We're going to have this biblical period of unemployment. We're going to have a lot of company failures. We're going to have a lot of municipal failures if we can't turn the lights on anytime soon. And so in a reset like this, there's a whole bunch of things we're going to leave behind, a whole bunch of things we're going to retain, a whole bunch of things we're going to create that are new. And so the challenge is that as technologists, we're very, very good at framing a problem, solving the problem, and the problems that we tend to solve, especially that driven by business models, and if we're doing startups, by venture capitalists, is to find, it's what is often called sort of aspirin problems as opposed to vitamin problems, like the thing that really pains people. And often one of the things that pains people is the cost of messy, expensive humans. So what's happened is an awful lot of the solutions for technology, from robots on automated lines to robotic process automation, are about finding costs in an organization and 10xing those costs, like reducing them dramatically, especially for very repetitive tasks. And it turns out that humans are a big part of the cost in a lot of businesses. And so what we've done is we've actually given technologists all of the signposts saying, listen, you go find a way to make it cheaper, faster, better, stronger, and do it without humans or with fewer humans. That good on you. Great. Here's your money. What I want to encourage is to flip the context. In the same way, education needs to flip the classroom, helping the teacher to move from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side, as my friend Esther Wojcicki says in her book, Moonshots in Education. We need to flip the context for how we're building technology. And especially with machine learning, artificial intelligence, any automated tasks. What we've done in the past is we've said, those are expensive things that people are doing. Let's try to, free them up. Well, 100% freed up person is unemployed. And so I always say robots and software don't take jobs. Humans give them away. If all of the tasks that you've automated add up to a job, bingo, gone. And in our shareholder driven world, that's an inevitable result in many organizations. However, you as a technologist, you have a completely different set of opportunities. Artificial intelligence actually gives us 6 different potential superpowers, from helping to understand our own skills better to actually helping to augment us as humans to be able to solve problems more effectively. That is the $1 trillion opportunity. That's where we have actually huge potential to be able to increase human productivity, to be able to increase output, to be able to increase the ability to solve the problems of tomorrow. Robots and software are going to keep on automating those, repetitive tasks. Humans need to focus on the creative problem solving that allows them to be able to keep on solving the problems of the future. And technology can help humans to do that. So that's the way I see us flipping the context and to link that to how people continually can have access to meaningful, well-paid work.
I like that a lot. And especially thinking about, you used the phrase creative problem solving. And I think that really is like the piece where maybe we discount that in ourselves, but that is what sets us apart, right? From ways, automation methods and whatnot. It's that creative problem solving. And I don't think, like I said, I just don't think we always give ourselves enough credit for the power of that, right? I have one final question on my list for you. Current reports show that, up to like 91% of the world's students are currently experiencing disruptions in learning. And, what are some of the most important opportunities you see for the world to respond to that and heal and help these students in the education process?
So I'm actually going to split those into 2 different things, because I think that you've asked what immediately resonates for me is sort of 2 different contexts. So first I want to focus on students. So if you were to wave a magic wand and you were to say, how do we take a human being from birth deep into adulthood and to allow them to have access to the resources they need to learn what they need at the different phases of development as a human, then we would sort of hit the reset button and we would say, we have this thing called preschool and then K-12 and then college and then adult learning. And we would say, well, wait a minute, that's sort of a staccato set of processes. And really what you want is you want to create a lifelong learner from beginning. You want to give them the resources and the access to those resources that allow them to continuously learn. You want to teach them very early on to learn how to learn. That is, how do I as a human being continually stay curious about things that fascinate me? And then how do I go find out information about those things? And how do I use that as a lens on learning more and more and more about the world? And then eventually channeling that into the work that I want to do to be able to contribute to that world. So if we did that, it's not just a thought experiment. It's actually our opportunity. Now we have these institutions that we call schools and colleges. But increasingly what's happening is I've written in pieces like Unbundling Higher Education and in a conference that we did on the future of higher education back in 2010. What I've said is we really could see this as an opportunity where in the same way work is unbundling, learning is unbundling. And how do we create the context where learners, no matter what the age, can continually have access to the resources and engage with others around that learning process? And what I hope we come out of this period with is understanding that there's just a whole bunch of ways that works really, really well. If it's problem-centric, if it's project-centric, if it teaches kids to collaborate, if it focuses on the things that fascinate them the most as the jumping off point for how they learn. If we think of the ways that we can actually interconnect learners around the world, if we can connect them to their communities more effectively. If you want a great model for this, the Logan School in Denver, actually, starting in 5th grade, has the kids who have all learned by project-based and problem-centric learning up until that point, now engage with local businesses to actually learn how they solve problems so that by the time they actually enter into the workforce, they get how adults approach these challenges of running businesses or meeting needs in a nonprofit. So all of those are opportunities for us. However, we've got limited resources. We've got teachers who have been given, low pay. We've got, there's all these challenges. The system itself is actually not optimized to help this happen. So parents have to step up. Parents have to say, listen, I want my kid to have more and more of this kind of context, and they have to help their kids to become, first off, learning how to learn, and to infect them with a love of learning so that they'll become lifelong learners. The second thing that I heard you say that I just wanted to say is about the world responding and healing and building a more equitable future. So I think we have two paths from this point. We can follow the path of polarization. We can follow the path that we've been following for some time, where we use this, the way we deal with this onslaught of information. We're continually inundated by news and social media and so on. And the way we as humans, our brains, which are not calibrated for this in the slightest, is we simplify. And unfortunately, what we do is we then retreat to our corners. and polarization works in media. It's proven. Those are the organizations making the most money if they can play to your outrage. Well, I think we have another path that we can follow, and that's the path of inclusion. And so you started off by asking questions like about community and what links us to our community. That's job one. We're back to the people, the concentric circles of love. Your friends, your family, the community, your neighbors. Those are all the people you bump into on a day-to-day basis, and or should be bumping into on a day-to-day basis when we're all able to leave our homes. But that to me is a huge opportunity for us to reconnect in our communities. But then there's that third concentric circle of people that you won't necessarily meet. And I think that also is our opportunity. If we follow that path of connectedness, what we're going to look back on this time is when we took the blinders off, when we realized half of the entire world's population is doing exactly the same thing. They're having to stay home and figure out how to work or to stay alive. That has never happened, except maybe going back to the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve split off into different parts of the garden for a little while. You've never had half of the population on the planet all doing one thing, dealing with the same issues. And so this is our opportunity as humans, is to realize that, no, those people that are trying to figure out how to cope with all of these issues and the anxiety and the disconnection, they're exactly like me. They're not that different. Sure, they live in different countries with different rule systems, but they're not that different. And here's where we get to build that more positive future, is by building off of those connections between us all.
I've experienced over the last couple of weeks this kind of strange connectedness, and it's unfortunate circumstances, but you do kind of feel connected to people around the world in a way that I've never experienced before. And I think that aligns with just exactly what you just said.
Yeah, absolutely. But that has to, for each of us, that then has to lead to a change in behavior. It's the first deliverable is to feel like, we have those connections. And the next deliverable is to act on them, is to figure out ways that one of the examples I give to people is, Try going through a day without ever using the words of polarization. Don't say them. Don't say red state, blue state. Don't stay, just don't use those words. Try getting through a day, maybe even a week, without ever using those words. And you'll see how hard it is because we've so quickly defaulted to them. That alone, I think, would be something to use as a thought experiment, as an exercise, to be able to build the mindset that I was talking about of a greater inclusion.
This whole subject is just obviously so timely, and I really think that the listeners of the podcast are going to enjoy this. This is something that, we're all a little maybe unsettled right now. There's some fear, but the things that you've talked about today are so important, and I think can hopefully put a lot of us in a little bit of a better thought space, if that makes sense.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I want to say, I guess maybe one more thing to listeners, and that's you got this. Like, you can do this. We can do this, right? I mean, this is literally one of the greatest challenges in human history, is dealing with this period. And we're going to look back and we're going to say, boy, that was a really short period. Even if it lasts a year and a half, it was a really short period, but it was a fundamental pivot point. It's a fundamental shift. There's a great reset. But we've got this. Like, we as humans, we can pick that path of greater connectivity. We can pick that path where we use technology to be able to help support and augment people and to build that better future. We've got this. Like, we're going to get through this near-term, really deep challenge of just, falling off the cliff and, figuring out where the bottom is. But we're going to pick ourselves up from this, and we have the opportunity to build that more positive future. And literally, it starts today.
Thanks again, Gary, so much for joining us today. And I want to give you the opportunity, if there's any other, I feel like what you just said was a great takeaway, final kind of thoughts. If there's anything else you want to throw out there, feel free to do it right now.
No, all I was going to say is, if any of these ideas or thoughts are useful to you, I've written extensively. I've got 5 lectures on Pluralsight where I talk about tech and impact, and the ways to be able to find the problems that you want to fall in love with, the problems that have affected other people. I post a lot on LinkedIn, and then on my site gbolles.com, I've got links to all of these, all my online courses and writings and so on, if that can be useful to people.
I will include links to all of those places in the show notes of the episode to hopefully make that easy for people to find. But beyond that, thanks again for joining us, and you have a great rest of your day, Gary.
All right. Thanks a bunch. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you for listening to All Hands on Tech. You can find show notes and more info at pluralsight.com/podcast. We've also included links to Gary's personal website and his Pluralsight courses in the show notes. Thanks again, and stay safe.